Oh, good, good. Okay, so I just want to introduce you to the crowd here. I'm not certain that everyone listening has heard you on my show, though you've been on quite a number of times. James is a tier one scientist. I believe he's the reincarnation of Tesla, but I mean, that's just my opinion, and James denies it. But James McCanney has taught in many universities. He is extremely well educated in all areas of science. He is not some guy who just you know, read a few books and runs around spouting off theories. James, how many established universities did you actually teach in?
Four.
Four.
And that's official courses. It would be five if you include the University in Novosibirsk in Russia, where I literally taught the scientists there, which were actually classes that they held every day, but it was an official university offering, so that would be the fifth.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to your credit is, despite the fact that you've had difficulties getting support from the university system since you came up with your different theory on the way the universe functions, the energy system, which is based more on electricity than on other sorts of energy systems, since you came out with this theory, that for some reason you got pushed out of the what were you in astronomy then? The astronomy department when you were talking about these ideas?
The issue you're probably talking about was when I was at Cornell University. It was like 1979 to 81, and I was on the faculty. I was first in the physics department, and uh, yeah, they didn't like it. And it basically the astronomy department put pressure on the physics department, and they didn't want me publishing my material or using their name or whatever, which is totally, against all educational standards of open publication and, scientific research, etc. And then I got rehired in the math department at Cornell University also. So I taught in both the math and the physics departments there. And then after a year and a half of continuing with my work, and the reason Cornell is important because it was a depository of all NASA data. So I had access. That's before NASA realized that they don't want people like me having access to their data. So I had access to all the NASA data, a Library of Congress. Cornell has a Library of Congress library, so it has everything there back to the Gutenberg Bible. Yeah, and they have everything there. And so I had this amazing research facility and used it. And of course, along with that, I had my research, which I had been doing for some time already, and dealing with the combining electric and magnetic fields in celestial mechanics. Celestial mechanics is the field where you study the motion of stars and planets and gravitationally bound objects. So I was combining electric and magnetic fields to understand how they worked, and end up at Cornell where all this data is coming in, and combining it all into creating all the various theories, which involved surface fusion on the sun, not core fusion. I had access to scientists like Hans Bethe, was resident at Cornell, and so I'd go up and talk to him. He was a Nobel Prize winner, friend of Albert Einstein, and we chatted about stuff. Hans Bethe was the inventor of the solar core fusion model that was current in the physics world, and I'm talking to him about my surface fusion model. And I told him I was having trouble getting this published in the journals, and he said, well, go publish it over, and he gave me some references in Europe where I eventually got my articles published. So anyway, it was just this vast array of people. Then it had a composite of NASA scientists who worked there. They were in residence. And the astronomy department, Carl Sagan, was the David Duncan Chair of Astronomy, which is an elite chair. What they call a chair means you have this position. It's kind of like being a knight, so to speak. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Top
Carl
dog.
Sagan was there, and he was there during the time he was making his Cosmos series. So all this stuff is going on at Cornell. I mean, it was just they have their own linear collider that runs under the campus. All this stuff going on, and I was in the hub of it. They have an astrophysics department, they have a space science department, and they have an astronomy department. So the three major branches of studying things out there beyond Earth were all there, and these were all world-renowned scientists, etc. So anyway, I had access to this whole community, and everybody there knew me as the this guy that was, creating these theories and my galactic model, the comet model, the plasma discharge comet model, all this stuff came out of there. The induced electric dipole redshift, which was a laboratory provable new source of redshift, which proved that the Big Bang didn't happen, that the redshifts that they were seeing were due to this electrical effect that you can show in the laboratory. Yeah, so I took literally every major theory they had and changed it to my own work and restructured physics. In the 2 years I was there, it was a very exciting time, but also a time when I got a lot of pressure and a lot of hatred, let's put it that way, extended towards me as a person there. But that's because I was rocking the boat, and that's something you're not supposed to do in academia.
Yeah. Well, Galileo went through it. Einstein went through it. I guess Tesla didn't. I guess Tesla did for a while too. But he sort of played ball with the big guys. Tesla, right? He got in good with J.P. Morgan and whatnot. So he didn't.
Well, they also reversed on him also. Because what J.P. Morgan wanted was a communication system, and Tesla was developing an energy system. J.P. Morgan bought Tesla's generator systems, the AC stuff, and along with Westinghouse. J.P. Morgan was part of the Westinghouse deal. And when Tesla did not produce the communication system that they were looking for, then J.P. Morgan pulled the money and left Tesla high and dry out in Colorado. So that's, there's a long history to that. But yeah, Tesla was very famous, very high in New York society, was single, and, was a very eloquent person, very well mannered and very well received and things like that. But yeah, he had his problems too with the establishment, you might say, and especially when he started developing the technology to capture electricity from the ionosphere and distribute it in the ground. He did not, there's a modern myth that he was going to distribute electricity in the air. His towers were to gather electricity, and at the Wardenclyffe and then out especially at the Colorado sites, he had the light system spread all over the countryside, and he was lighting up lights with the current that was running in the ground after he collected it from the atmosphere. But anyway, a few details there. But Cornell was a very interesting place to be, and also was some of the groundwork for the work that later surfaced, my work on prime numbers. And so all that history is locked into those roots there. In fact, it was the work I did in celestial mechanics to try and solve the n-body problem. That was the core problem I was working on, solving the analytical solution for more than two bodies in celestial mechanics to solve their motion with equations. I used those same techniques to solve the prime number problem, where you can directly calculate prime numbers. So anyway, a lot of fruitful work came out of those years, and lots of things came afterwards. Like in the 90s, when I was working with the Russian scientists, I was very advanced in my weather work at that point, and they got wind of my work, and these were atmospheric scientists, Alexei Dmitriev at the University of Novosibirsk in central Russia, And these were the top Russian scientists in the world. They had been to Tunguska. They realized that the Tunguska event, which most people think of as an asteroid hitting Earth, was an electrical event. And they saw these other regions like in the Sahara Desert in North Africa. It's called the Eye of the Sahara. It's a big magnetic spherical system of ridges in the middle of the desert. And it's very electrical, was caused by electricity, and they didn't know where any of this stuff came from, or a lot of atmospheric phenomena they were studying. They had already observed tornadoes on the sun moving across the surface of the sun, and they're going, what's doing all this? And so they came across my work. Somebody said, hey, let's look at this McCanney stuff, and they just jumped on it. It was like, that explained everything that they had been looking at. And so anyway, that started a very rich collaboration with those scientists in Russia in the mid-90s. So anyway, that's just kind of a brief history of some of the things that had gone on in the interim there.
Yeah, so you went basically from Cornell, which was sounds like it was a hub of the top physicists and astronomers on the planet. Then you went over to Russia right after that, right?
That was no. There was some time in between there, and I had taught at a state college system. In fact, that's where I taught astronomy, official university astronomy, which was very strange. Me teaching astronomy out of a standard textbook, and that was in the early '90s when I did that. I had already, before I got to Cornell. In fact, the way I got the Cornell job is because I had already taught physics, mathematics, and computer science in a multilingual setting. I was bilingual. And so that's what landed me the job there, because they needed somebody for their introductory courses in the physics department that was bilingual.
Yeah, it's Spanish, right? That's your second language?
Yeah, and I had the experience. So the guy goes, I'd actually gone to the physics department at Cornell, and I said, hey, can I get, I want to go back to grad school and further my degree. I already had a master's degree in physics in nuclear and solid state physics. So I went up to the Department of Physics at Cornell and said, can I get into the school here? And they said no. The head of the department name was Doug Fitchen. He looked at, I came back for my interview, and he goes, well, I'm sorry, but we're all booked up here for years in advance. We have international students. And he goes, but you could teach here. And I'm like, well, what? He said, yeah, you can teach here. We need you. So he gave me a job teaching in the physics department. And I still have my faculty cards, everything. I kept all of that for posterity. But so anyway, I'm in the first semester, teaching and doing the stuff, and the astronomy department gets wind of my papers, of me publishing papers and doing my work in celestial mechanics and stuff like that. And they came down. Doug Fitchen, the head of the physics department, calls me in, and he has my papers strewn around on his desk, and he goes, "What's this?" And he's really peed off. I can tell he's just like super angry. And I said, "It looks like you have some of my papers on your desk." And he tore into me. He said, "You cannot do this. You cannot publish this work here. You cannot use Cornell's name, and you cannot talk to the students about any of this." And I'm like, "What? You got to be kidding me." And so anyway, he had
academic freedom. Whatever happened to academic freedom? I mean, give me
I think it died there. And so anyway, I'm just like shocked. I'm like, what's going on here? And he said, look, one of their biggest concerns is that I would talk to students. So they had a woman who was a PhD faculty member there. I think her name was Mrs. Robinson. I can't remember. I've got it in my notes. It's in my book. But her job was to be with me at all times when I was on campus in the physics department. When I was with some of the classes had labs, of course. So if I was in the lab, She was there, and I could only talk about things related to the lab. I couldn't talk to students about anything, my own work. And she was there. She shadowed me all the time that I was on campus when I was working in the physics department, in the physics department. And then that was my first semester at Cornell. That was fall semester 1979. And then I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And so I had already kind of set up shop over in the math department because I didn't, because I spent a lot of time at Cornell. They had the old library there. There was called the Rotunda Room. It was a big rotunda, circular domed room with beautiful sun, and that's where I did a lot of my writing, was in that room. And so that was kind of where I would hang out because it was in the old library. And then the new library had all the stacks that went way down underground. That was where the Library of Congress was. And I didn't like being up in the physics department. I had an area where I could go up in the space science department and where I could work and things like that. And like I say, that was back when things were pretty loose as far as the NASA data. It was all in computers and in big leaf notebooks of the pictures. And daily, they would have 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It would maybe be lectures or talks or data gathering sessions where they would discuss new data. And like I say, they had the astronomy, space science, and astrophysics department. So there was always a mountain of stuff going on there. So I attended all of these. I went to the meetings. All the people knew me. And I just I observed, for a lot of this time. And then I realized, man, these guys don't have a clue what's going on. These guys are somewhere in the cave ages, but dealing with all these old, outdated theories. And I could tell that what I was doing was correct. So anyway, I then got a job in the math department, teaching calculus. So there, now I'm on the faculty again. They thought they got rid of me out of the physics department. So here I am at Cornell again in the math department. And so if you look at my peer-reviewed published papers, they say J.M. McCanney, Department of Mathematics, Cornell University. So it's a whole laundry list of interesting events happened with that too. But so I spent another 1.5 years in the math department and doing my work and continuing my research. And one day, Wolfgang Fuchs was his name. He was a German, very thick accent. He was the head of the mathematics department. And he called me in and he says, I'm not sure what to do here. He said, we have the students petitioning. There were 350 students petitioned to have me teach their calculus class because I took over a guy, he had left for like some kind of a leave. And so I took over his calculus class, 350 students. And when he came back, the students went over and petitioned that I keep teaching their class. And he had this petition. And he said, the students love you. They want you to teach more here. He said, you're the only faculty member in the history of Cornell University mathematics department that has published in peer-review astrophysics journals, because my publications were going into astrophysics journals. He said, you're the only math faculty that has ever gotten a paper published in an astrophysics journal. He said, but the people from the astronomy department want me to fire you. And he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, I can tell you what to do. He said, ignore them. But the heap of the roost at Cornell was Carl Sagan in the astronomy department. They ruled the roost. And if they didn't like something, they controlled a lot there because it's a lot of the money. They had big money coming in. Then they had Hollywood money coming in. Carl Sagan was, off doing the Cosmos series, which, by the way, is a lot of really outdated, bad science, including the new Cosmos series with what's his name? I forget the guy's name.
Hawking's?
No. He's a kind of another spokes guy for the physics world. It's got like a triple name. Too late at night for me to
Not Stephen
remember.
Hawking. Okay.
No. Anyway, there's a recently Anne Druyan, who is Carl Sagan's second wife, um, was his secretary when he was at Cornell, and she did all the data gathering and accumulation and promotion, and did all of his contact work. So Carl was kind of like the personality. She was the person behind the scene, and then she got together a number of years ago with some people from the old Carl Sagan Cosmos series and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this again?" So they got another Cosmos series together and put it together where the guy stands there and you have the big picture of the cosmos and it talks. It's like a talking thing for the public, but really bad science.
So James, can
Really,
you put it out in the simplest terms possible? The difference between your theory of celestial mechanics and the one that's sort of commonly espoused now by most people.
yeah, just put it in a nutshell. What I do is I combine electric and magnetic fields into the mix. Standard astronomy, whether you're dealing with galactic stuff or solar system or moons of Jupiter, etc., strictly standard science strictly deals with the gravitational part. And they can't explain why they see all this electromagnetic stuff going on. So they just kind of sweep it under the rug and they have various other names like magnetic reconnection or flux tubes, or they make up these goofy names to try and explain magnetic fields are out there that they can't explain, that like they just think these magnetic fields just magically appear all by themselves, which is ludicrous. So what I did when I was at Cornell, now you can imagine, I had been already working with this, so I understood the shapes, the forms that things would take when they moved electrically. I understood how moons would charge around like Saturn or Jupiter, and I understood the surface fusion process that had a proton wind. And anyway, the bottom line is I knew what created the electric fields. I knew what the discharges of these electric fields would look like. And when you combine this with normal gravitational motion, then it had certain effects. Like, for example, a comet nucleus. A comet is on an elliptical orbit. The standard comet explanation is that it is an ice ball, or dirty snowball, they call it now, that melts when it gets near the sun, and the term is sublimation, where the ice goes directly to the gas, forms the tail of the solar radiation, blows the tail away from the sun. That's the standard explanation. My explanation of that is it doesn't have to be a rock, or it doesn't have to be ice.
James, you're breaking up.
Hot.
You're breaking up a bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How am I now?
Are you moving around at all? Or are you in one place?
No, not at all.
No?
Right now I'm breaking up?
Okay, you sound a bit better now. Try to talk a bit slower. I find when people are starting to break up, if you speak slower, any little missing sounds, it's easier to understand. Sometimes it's just a temporary problem.
Okay.
Explain
let me try some.
your view. Explain your view of
Okay.
how it works versus the dirty the dirty ice ball theories.
Yeah. Okay. So what I say, a comet is a completely different animal. The sun has a proton wind that leaves the sun. It's part of the fusion process. And this proton wind creates a giant capacitor, basically a giant battery that surrounds the sun, and that battery goes way out beyond the planet Pluto. Okay, so what do you have? You have a gap, an electrical gap. So an object comes in, a rock or a piece of space rock or something that could be even the size of a planet, and discharges this capacitor. And now you look at the electrical flow, electrons coming out from the sun. You look at the flow of ions coming in from this far region, and it becomes a comet. This is what a comet is, but it's becoming electrically charged negatively because of the electron stream from the sun, and that causes positively ionized material, dust and gases, to be drawn into the comet nucleus. And the comet nucleus is really hot. It's too hot to have ices on it, and that's what they have discovered. They've landed on comet nuclei. There's no ice. There's no water. It's hot, dry tar, and hydrocarbons and water comes in, etc. So my theory is correct. That's one example, but see, now understand, when I first started accumulating data, it was dealing with moons of Saturn and Jupiter acting like this. And it turns out that Jupiter and Saturn are literally small stars with the same type of fusion process in their atmosphere. So I'm at Cornell. I'm seeing this data come in from the Pioneer and the Voyager spacecraft and the spacecraft around Venus and other planets. And I'm seeing this data, and these guys are talking about it, and they are trying to fit this square peg in their round hole of gravitational data and theories. And I'm going like, wow, man, these guys have no clue what's going on here. So that allowed me 2 years to build this entire theoretical structure, publish my papers, and create the basis for what I call the electric universe. That's a term I developed, and much copied today by a lot of internet wannabes.
That's for sure.
And but that's why I created that term, to kind of encapsulate my work, my thoughts. So all of this electrical stuff, and then when there are electrical currents flowing, they create magnetic fields. So you have to understand, with the data, I kind of backed into this because NASA they never put electrical field sensing devices on their satellites or spacecraft. They only had magnetometers. So I would see the magnetometer data and I would go, that's what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing this is the end result of electrical currents, and I knew how to interpret the data, even though the spacecraft were incorrectly designed, and the data was coming in all garbled because they didn't know what it meant. So they were trying to mix this data up and do something with it. But I was able to see through all of this and prove my theoretical work. And then NASA started to hide the data. They would take data that I could see coming in, and then I'd notice in their published papers in Science or Nature magazine, that was missing. Certain key parts of my research that proved my work were missing. And so my predictions about X-rays, all of this stuff got scuttled. And when they finally discovered X-rays in comets, they came along and created these goofy theories based on chemistry and gravity. Totally ridiculous. But that's what gets published from NASA. So they're still doing this, hokey gravitational model, when literally everything we see around us is electrical in outer space. And you have to understand, the people that try and copy my work don't understand these subtleties. But the electrical conditions only manifest themselves on very special certain occasions and under certain conditions. So the planets don't go flying around with huge electric fields and acting like electrons and protons. What I discovered was that the bigger things have less and less electrical effects, because the electricity part of it just gathered around the surface. So something like Earth or Jupiter, etc., would not see tremendous electrical effects. They would act mostly gravitationally. So only the small particles like dust particles or small grains of material would have an electric or magnetic effect. So you had to understand all of this in context. And that's something that even today, scientists don't have a clue how to interpret data, how to design a spacecraft, or etc.
Now, do you think that though that the higher level scientists like you that work for the military understand this stuff?
Oh, I know they do. Yeah, because they've come out and talked to me. I've had many of them call me up or see me at meetings that I'm at, and they come up and talk to me. And the one thing that they all tell me is they say, we can't figure out how you figured out all this stuff. And they're learning from me. Like I taught the Russian atmospheric scientists, all of this stuff. I taught a lot of the U.S. tier one scientists the basics. And of course, they're smart. Once they get the basics, they can go off and run with it. They can start, I was in the 80s or in the mid 90s with the Russian scientists, we were working on ways to manipulate hurricanes. And those same techniques were picked up by the U.S. military, now using them to create storms like Katrina, created storms. Well, our goal was to control storms and move them away from population centers, and they fell into the hands of these crazies in the U.S. military, and they're using them to create storms and destroy population areas. You know, but yeah, I was instrumental in designing those systems for peaceful, useful purposes. But those guys would come out and talk to me, and and these are guys that had all the equipment available to them, all of the research information. And the other thing I knew too is that the what I called the tier two science, these were the guys that were at Cornell, the NASA guys, or if they publish in university or in peer-reviewed journals. These were typically what I call tier two scientists. They were not the tier one guys at all. And that's why I was having such a tough time with them, because they really weren't that good as scientists. And they didn't understand physics.
Well,
Most of the
they let me just say they basically have a two like a more than one tier or two tier system, but they don't want them to understand what they're doing at the military level, right? They want to keep it secret. It's part of their secret cover up covert plan, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and that's a long story in itself, which I've lived through. 1991, the first when George Bush Sr. became president in the United States, his very first appointment was a guy named Dan Golden, who was a buddy of Bush's in the CIA. Dan Golden's job was to take over NASA and split it into tier one and tier two. And the tier one stuff went away and you never saw it ever again. And the tier two guys were the guys who remained visible in NASA. And they were under gag orders. They couldn't just come up and research and do what they wanted and get up on a microphone platform and talk. Everything they did was controlled. That's where all of the global warming stuff came out of, all government controlled. Those scientists, I remember it was comical. There were some scientists that were complaining. They said all of our studies, they publish their work and they send it off to review, the final review at NASA. And when it gets published, it's all different. And they go, we didn't publish this. That's not our paper. And they go, well, you're part of NASA. This is what you do. You feed us the information and we homogenize and blend it to pass off to the public. So that's what goes on in tier two science. Those scientists don't have any ability to communicate, and most of them aren't they're not very good scientists. Because I've been at meetings with these guys and I'm talking to them and I'm like, wow, these guys don't have a clue. Whereas the tier one guys, I would talk to them on their level and they're like, holy cow, where do you get all this information? But see, I had the physics background, the math background, and the my own theoretical background where I could figure all this stuff out without ever doing experiments. That's what theoreticians do. So I was able to construct all of this theoretical work before anybody had ever taken any data. And so when the data came in, I just applied what I knew in my theoretical work. And then that's like when I rediscovered what Tesla was doing. Tesla, when he lived, he didn't know about the solar wind or about electrical conditions in the solar system or the solar capacitor or fusion on the sun. He didn't know about any of these things. All he knew is that if he did certain things, he could tap into the electric field of Earth and gather electricity and make it into useful form.
He was more of
He
an
didn't.
engineer, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was very much an engineer. He knew about alternating currents, and he invented the electric motor, the alternating current generators. Oh man, this guy was. He really understood that stuff. But he didn't know where the energy came from. He didn't understand a lot of things, and that's where when I worked on all this stuff I was doing, once I got to incorporating Tesla's stuff, I went back and re-examined what he was doing, and I was the first guy literally since Tesla that really put understanding into what he was doing, because I understood where the electric fields were coming from. They were coming from the solar electric field and how those filtered down into the troposphere of Earth and where this energy was coming from, etc. So that's why when the tier one scientists would come out to talk to me, they were like, you figured all this stuff out. They had been trying to figure this stuff out for a long time, but they were just, marching off in the wrong directions. They didn't know where to go. But I had it all figured out, and once you start applying the principles of what I discovered, then all of this stuff falls into place. What Tesla was doing, the electrical nature of hurricanes and tornadoes, and that's why you see tornadoes or hurricanes, a lot of electrical activity. Why? Because they're driven by electrical currents.
So did you develop matrix equations where you could use multivariant factors to determine, the different forces at different distances from the sun and things of that sort?
Well, in a sense, I mean, I've taught matrix algebra. I've taught all of these courses at the university level. But when you get down to the physics of this, it's a lot of understanding. It's a lot of intuitive understanding. And then, of course, a lot of it comes out in equations. For example, how to treat charge to mass ratio. That's the charge versus the mass of an object. Combining, imagine a planet or imagine a comet, let's say, not that big an object, say. It's associated with the sun. It's in orbit around the sun. It has a high electric field, and it has a lot of material being drawn in due to that electric field. So it's not the electric field that changes its orbit. It's the fact that it's drawing in all this material that is changing its orbit. And that's what I say. You have to understand the people like Velikovsky, he thought, well, electric fields are making the planets move around differently. No, that's not what's going on. The electric field causes material that's in the solar system to be drawn in like a vacuum cleaner, and drawing in that material changes the orbit. So you have to understand this stuff in context. Eventually you get into mathematics and understand that a comet has a gravitational field, which is not very significant. It's combined with the gravitational field of the sun, but its main activity is due to an electrical discharge, which creates an electric field around the nucleus and which creates magnetic fields, which are characteristic of all of this electrical activity going on. So now combine this into the equations that govern the motion, and you have a very complex situation. And so anyway, understanding this gets to be very complicated.
Yeah. Now, this celestial mechanic sort of system you developed, could you use it for space travel?
There's a whole branch of propulsion systems, and that's another interesting branch of what came out of this. There's two naturally occurring propulsion systems that I developed, and in probably, let's say, I was at Cornell between 79 and 81. By 1982, I was out in California, in Los Angeles, with the first propulsion system that I developed, which used a plasma fusion reactor. I already understood that Jupiter and Saturn, whoops, hang on a second.
Okay.
What the heck is this?
A phone call may be coming in. That sounds like a
No, it's a I don't know how to shut this thing off. Excuse me.
Maybe it's
that was an alarm. That was an alarm for your
Ah,
show, actually.
oh, good.
And so anyway, but the propulsion systems, yeah, that's very interesting. The one I gave talks at private military meetings starting as early as 1982. And one of the talks was actually filmed. It's a classified film, so it's not publicly available. But it was done in Colorado Springs, oddly enough, where Tesla, did his work. But that was done in, I think, 1985, where I gave a talk to, it was called the 19th International Electric Propulsion Conference. And I was an invited speaker there. I also gave a similar talk at the Air America Air Show in probably around 1986 also. In the Air America Space Show was the U.S. version of the Paris Air Show. And that's where I met Bert Rutan, who was out there marketing his composite materials back in his early days of being in the aerospace industry. And but anyway, I was there marketing the propulsion system, the first one, which was a fusion reaction plasma reactor that then created a high electric current that went through glass tubes and worked against magnetic fields. And you could use these for docking devices on satellites. You could use them for independent propulsion systems in the atmosphere or outside of the atmosphere. And needless to say, that was sucked up into the tier one level of military. And I, at that time, met a number of venture capital groups out in Los Angeles. And they were looking for funding, military funding for my project. And one day I was in a meeting with the Prime Venture Capital Group, the principals, and we were talking, and I said, the one thing I don't want my inventions being used to deliver nuclear bombs. And they looked at me like the man from Mars. Like, this is what this is going to be used for.
Yeah, exactly.
And so anyway, they started to realize that I was not a team player in that respect. So I started getting distanced from my own project. And eventually I discovered that it got moved into another think tank out in San Diego, in La Jolla. Not in San Diego, but up in La Jolla in California. But my IEEE publication of my paper is actually reprinted in my Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection book. You can see the reprint of that propulsion system and how it works and et cetera in that. And it's a technical paper. It deals with specific impulse, which is a technical term for the amount of energy you get out of a certain amount of propulsion you get for the amount of energy you put into a propulsion system. And it compares my system with chemical rockets, nuclear rockets, other types of propulsion, ion engines, which were in existence at that time. They've started to use those commonly on spacecraft now. But the system I developed went into tier one and it disappeared there. And years later.
Now, do you think they're using it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no question. Years later, I was talking with a guy who was a physicist in Colorado, in Denver. And I can't remember why we were talking. And so anyway, I just started describing that my project, that's what my project was, and that it got ripped off, and a number of other things related to that project, which only somebody that had been in tier one science would know. And so I talked to the guy for a while, and I was explaining this to me, and he said, stop. He said, wait a minute. He said, you are describing classified information on projects that I worked on. That's what the guy told me. He said, I can't believe you are telling me. He said, you're the guy that designed this project that he's working on, that he had worked on for many years as an engineer, as a physicist. And he told me he had worked on my project in Denver at a, I forget which aerospace corporation he worked for. But only somebody like me that had designed the project would know all of those details. And he told me, he said, I believe you because you just described what I worked on.
Now, could this propulsion system, James, move you quicker than like say a jet propulsion system? I know that the Russians say they have a rocket now that can go to Mars in 6 weeks. Would it be similar to that quality, or would it be even faster than that?
Well, once you're away from magnetic fields, that propulsion system is not very effective. No,
Okay.
what the Russians are doing is they're using a conventional rocket which burns continuously. We're used to the space shuttle and the Saturn V rocket or the Delta rockets or whatever, the Arians, that go up into space and you see this big blast of fire coming out of the rockets, and they go up into space, and say that those rockets burn for under 10 minutes max. Some of them burn for 3 or 4 minutes, some of the military type rockets, but they don't burn very long. So the technique for going to Mars or any other planet in a short period of time is you have a constant acceleration. It's not as much, but it burns for like half of that time. And so you burn for half of the time accelerating, and then you turn the rocket around and you decelerate for half the time. I've done some radio shows on this very topic. And what happens is that, yeah, you can get to Mars in a couple of weeks. It takes NASA, years to get to Mars, or like what, 10 years to get to Pluto? Using the technique that the Russians are talking about, you can get to Pluto in about 2 months. And so it's just a common technique. I gave a radio show talking about going to other star systems using that technique. You can get to the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, which is about 4.5 light years away. You can get there at about never getting anywhere near the speed of light or anything, just normal non-relativistic speeds. You can get there in about 6 years, less time than it takes NASA to get to Pluto. You can get to the next star system. And so after I started giving those lectures, Russia picked up on it, NASA picked up on it, which was rather comical. It took NASA about a week to get their own version of that out there. And of course, they didn't have any propulsion system to go with it, because there's no propulsion system that NASA knows about that can burn for 4.5 years. And that's where my second propulsion system came in. The first propulsion system I was talking about back in the 1980s, it had a plasma fusion reactor which created the electrical currents. So it was an active propulsion system, but it was non-inertial. In other words, it didn't spew material out of a rocket cone, to make it go. It passed electrical currents through glass tubes to push against magnetic fields. So it was not what you call inertial.
It was more. Yeah, it was designed sort of like in between planets, close to planets, like within the solar system. But to get beyond, you needed something different.
Right. And so I have another propulsion system, and it is a passive propulsion system, which is very interesting. It rides along electrical currents, which there is many. I talked earlier about the electrical currents that go between stars. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the Sun and Jupiter and Saturn are stars. They have a solar capacitor, a fusion-based capacitor. Well, the galactic nucleus has a fusion-based capacitor also. And these electrical currents are flowing down the galactic arms, and so they're flowing between the stars. So you can ride those electrical currents. And it was back in the early 2000s, I gave a talk which was attended by a lot of NASA scientists and military scientists. There were about 50 there. It was actually a public speech. You can see this speech. It's in my one of my DVD collections that's available to the public on my webpage. but it's called Electric Highways to the Stars. And it talks about that propulsion system and how we can ride electrical currents just like the old square rig sailing ships would ride wind currents to and from the New World. You can ride electrical currents to the next star system. And so, without carrying any fuel, this is a passive propulsion system. You can actually travel between stars with this propulsion system. And so that's the second. There's two propulsion systems that I've designed.
Is it quick? Would it be as quick as the Russian or slower?
Well, it'd be as quick.
Okay, coming up on the break here, James. So why don't you grab the chat box, and we'll be back soon in about 5 more minutes, folks, with more of a fascinating. Welcome back to I'm Nature. I'm your host, Brian Porter, and I have the most fascinating guest this evening, James McCanney. And we spent the first hour. For me, I just wanted people to understand how credible this guy is and how brilliant he is, because sometimes we get into topics that people think, oh well, this couldn't be true, but I'm telling you, this James does not make stuff up. When he says something is happening, it is happening. It is the truth. It is beyond, I think, question. But anyways, because we're going to get into rods of God soon and that sort of issue. But James, just finishing up on the issue of these two propulsion systems that you created. The first one, could that be used for commercial purposes, like for airlines and whatnot?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, but there are issues with using magnetic fields because we have electrical conditions in our atmosphere, little things called lightning, other things that create local magnetic fields that can cause problems. And so, using something for commercial use, it has to be a pretty stable system. The modern jet engine is a phenomenally stable system. There are no moving parts. There are only ball bearings. Once the engine gets running, it's a system where you put gas into it or fuel, whatever, airline fuel, and it goes through a series of fan blades. The fuel gets compressed, mixed with oxygen, then burns in a chamber, gets reversed, goes up and turns other fans, which drive the outer fans. It's called a fan jet. And so the propulsion, about 90% of it comes from the fans that are on the outside being driven and forcing the air out the back end. And out the center of the back end comes the exhaust from the burning process. But all this happens without any moving parts. The only moving part is the gauge, which opens the valve for the fuel to come in. I mean, it's amazingly reliable. And so you have to have a system that could compete with that. The only problem with jets today is they fly in the atmosphere. So they're continually plowing through the atmosphere at 32,000 feet cruising altitude. And the same exact jet airplanes could, with a little bit of redesign, it's called cryogenics. In other words, they would bring oxygen tanks with them on the aircraft. They could go up to an altitude of 2 or 3 times that and actually get going much faster, much faster. They would actually be in a low Earth orbit in the atmosphere, and you could circle the globe in a couple hours. And this is all doable, except that they won't go there because jet fuel is a big business. That's the big cost in jet travel. I don't know if people know that. You have all your staff and personnel and buying airplanes, et cetera. That's not the major cost. The major cost is gasoline, or airline fuel, jet fuel, and so that's the major expense. So that's where the majority of money is made in airline travel. So if you take that away, all of a sudden your flights become super cheap. You can fly from Tokyo to New York in an hour and a half, in the very same airplane that you're going right now. So anyway, back to your question. So to compete against that on a commercial level with a magnetic propulsion system, you have to have something that's that reliable. And I'm not saying that the electromagnetic propulsion system is not reliable. You just have other factors. Jets get hit by lightning all the time, and they just keep going. They're amazingly reliable in all kinds of diverse weather, winter, rain, whatever. They work just fine. But electromagnetic propulsion systems have other factors. So that would make them less desirable for commercial use.
Yeah. This would be more for like a space shuttle kind of system, right? Get it out,
Right.
bring it back.
But once you're up in the atmosphere, up higher, that's where they become useful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it sounds great. Okay. Let's switch gears a bit. Like I say, I just wanted to show people what a credible scientist you are, and yet you're above average. That's for sure, in my opinion. And you really do know what you're talking about. So you just told me before we got on air that you had been in Ecuador for the last month. And the
About
last
3 weeks, yeah.
Okay, well, a long period of time, which is good. And so you sort of you said you were experiencing a lot of earthquakes there.
Yes, every day, every day. In the last day I was there was a 6.6, and as I was telling you on the phone, I happened to be in the shower when it hit. And being in the bathroom is not a good place to be when an earthquake hits, because what you have to do is run out of the building into the street. So I was taking a shower at the time, and a lot of the tremors were not that big. They were fours and things like that, and they would shake, but very briefly. But this 6.6 lasted quite a bit of time. So anyway, here I am in the shower, soaking wet, soap. I was slipping, and the earthquake is slamming me up against the walls from one wall to the other. So I'm trying to get out of the shower and running in my bare feet. It's after dark, and I'm trying to find my way to the door to get out and get out of the building to, get out in the street. And so I have I have a towel in my hand and nothing else. It was no time to pick anything up there, clothes or anything else. So I run out in the street with my towel wrapped around me, and everybody else is in the street. So that's where you get to know the people that are out in the street. You get to, but it's you don't want to be caught in a shower during an earthquake.
Were you in a city, or were you in a suburban area, or were you more out in the country?
No, it was in a city. Yeah.
Okay.
And but anyway, that particular one, the people had seen, the people that had been outside saw, you mentioned this earlier, rods from God, and that was a topic that I covered earlier with the earlier Ecuador earthquakes being caused by satellite-based military weapons. The people saw another rod from God come in. And by the time I got out into the street, I was seeing the electrical activity, the atmospheric electrical activity as a result of that. And there were no clouds, there was nothing. And there is such a thing, a topic that I pioneered, dealing with earthquake luminosity, it's called. Basically, there's lights that occurs many times around the time of an earthquake. But these were very, very bright lights. These were not average earthquake luminosity. And so this was a result of another rod from God causing that earthquake. So basically, it's the United States giving Ecuador the business because they're not complying with international banking rules, which is what it comes down to. They're not allowing the international banking cartel to run their country. And it's a very poor third world country standing up on its own, trying to fight this mammoth worldwide economic system like Venezuela is being crippled by that same system now because they're not playing ball with the international bankers. So they have a boycott in Venezuela, and the people are starving there. But they won't release the food. They won't allow the um, the monetary system in Venezuela, which is the bolivar, is collapsing, and that's what they do. They I call it giving them the business, which is what they're doing. They're destroying them economically. They're creating hyperinflation, which is an international monetary exchange policy run by the world bankers. It has nothing to do with Venezuela being
Yes.
and you see the news articles and they go, oh, that's because they're a communist country. Communism is failing. No, they're trying to buck the international monetary system, and they're getting the business. That's what's going on. And the
Now,
same with Ecuador.
Is Ecuador a bit more self-sufficient when it comes to their agriculture, though, or is that why they're bombing them versus just putting the giving the business as they are in Venezuela?
Yeah, well, see, in Venezuela, they can shut down the food distribution. The bankers can.
Hmm.
And that's what's going on. That's why the people are starving there. But in Ecuador, they have their own food system where they grow their own food. They have tremendous non-GMO, no chemicals, completely organic, beautiful food. They have their own seafood source of seafood. They're on the Pacific, and they have amazing seafood there. They have the chicken industries and things like that. It's all organic and non-GMO. So they're bucking that system. They have their own very good medical system, although it's very difficult for the poor people to get into the medical system, but they do have public medicine. And they have amazing, beautiful road systems. They have a lot of infrastructure investment. They produce 100% of their petroleum nationally. Their electricity comes from 3 hydro plants. All of their electricity is free, completely economically, or what I would say, environmentally safe. And they have so much electricity, they sell it to Peru and Colombia. And so Ecuador is been turned around into it's the #1 in Con Nast magazine, the very high-end travel magazine, and other travel magazines and tourist magazines, the very high-end ones. Ecuador is the #1 place in the world to live. Now, if you're there, you see a lot of poverty. You see a lot of, it's a third world country, but it's classified as the #1 place out of 172 countries. Ecuador is listed as the #1 place in the world to live year after year. Why is that? Because it's great food, it's super inexpensive, there's no GMO, there's no chemicals, it's got a good medical system, and beautiful road systems. You would think you're driving in, the best roads of the United States when you're on the main highways. And, so, I mean, but they're bucking the international banking system. President Correa, when he's been in office almost 12 years, when he first got into office, he canceled their international debt, something that the United States and Canada should both do. He canceled the debt. He said, we're not paying it. It's illegal. They took him to an international court, and he got it down to 40%, and he says, okay, I'll pay that. Paid it off. Ecuador is debt-free. They produce all of their petroleum. They don't have a petroleum debt like the United States. They don't have a big military. They have very minimal military expenditures. They spend all of their money on improvements of infrastructure, and the government buys all of the agricultural produce, guarantees the farmer a price so the farmers don't lose their butt if they have a bad season, or they know when they grow a cucumber that they're going to get so much money for that cucumber because the government is going to pay them and then the government allows them to sell them at that price. So they have a price that allows the farmers a guaranteed price, and the farmers can sell directly to the consumer. And it's amazingly good food. Non-GMO, no Monsanto, no chemicals, all organically grown. They have massive greenhouse systems where they grow all of this. Okay, let me talk about food prices. 2 heads of lettuce, these are big, fresh, beautiful heads of lettuce, 30 cents. And the other thing that they did is they pegged their currency to the dollar, so they don't have an exchange rate. It's a it's a very interesting situation. So they're not subject.
The U.S. dollar, you mean?
They have pegged their monetary system to the U.S. dollar, which is amazing because the international monetary exchange rate is what they're destroying. That's what they're destroying Venezuela with. Is they're creating hyperinflation just by devaluating its dollar artificially for no reason, because Venezuela is an oil-producing country. It exports. Ecuador doesn't export. Ecuador exports maybe a little bit, but they mainly have their oil production for themselves. So Ecuador is energy independent, electricity and petrol, and they want to move to an all-electric society, all-electric cars. They have that much electricity that's free, literally for free. This is what happens in a country where you have a president that is for the people. That's what can happen. But there's a lot of poverty there. I mean,
according to my friend David Denny, though, that they're having some issues in the rainforest areas.
Yes.
That they've committed a certain percentage of the country to China.
Yes.
And other interests, and they are having issues with the native people there.
Yeah. It's a third world country. They've got issues. They're linked with Russia and Bolivia with uranium. That's what I talked about before, is that the Russians and the Bolivians have been in there for many years getting ready to excavate the uranium. And of course, a small country like Ecuador doesn't have the resources to manage a big project. It's that same region in southeastern Ecuador where the oil region is. And China has a stake in that. After the earthquake, China signed a $5.3 billion line of credit for rebuilding Ecuador. And of course, that needs to be paid back, what they use. But at the same time, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and the Development Bank of the Americas came in and tried to give Ecuador loans, and Ecuador would not sign them. And that's what the earthquakes are all about. The U.S. military dropping literally rods from gods with nuclear weapons in them to create those earthquakes. And that's still going on. But they're trying to force Ecuador into signing these International Monetary Fund loans, which would basically allow the European bankers control of the natural resources of Ecuador. And they're not signing they're not signing on the line on those loans. Therefore, they're getting the business, which is a little different than Venezuela. Excuse me.
Well, they're much stronger economically, so they have to use some other tactic.
That's exactly right. Plus, they're aligned with China, so economically, and so you see a lot of Chinese business in Ecuador and other countries where they're, after the first major earthquake in April, which really rattled the country. I mean, it was a major, major earthquake, destroyed towns of 50,000 people, destroyed entire towns and cities. Was a major disaster for the country. And on the doorstep of that comes the International Monetary Fund Bank trying to force them to sign up for these recovery loans. And that's how the European bankers get control of resources. And Correa wouldn't sign. He knew what was going on. In the case of Maduro, which is in Venezuela, They were dependent on foreign oil sales, exporting oil on the oil market. So when Russia left the petrodollar, so did Venezuela, and they were trading for gold and other commodities. They were trading for chickens with Cuba. They were trading for doctors and medical training for their students with Cuba for oil. They were trading with Bolivia, other things that Bolivia had. And so, anyway, they were trading out of the petrodollar, and that's why Venezuela's getting the business, is because, and so what happened, the oil prices dropped worldwide. Saudi Arabia started producing vast amounts of oil, drove down the world oil prices, and Venezuela is suffering. But Venezuela doesn't produce a lot of its own food like Ecuador does.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, hopefully they'll. Last time I spoke to David, I thought it was like an all-out war between the Shuar people and the mercenaries they sent in to kick them off the land. That I guess the government sold them for development, and they didn't get the okay from the Shuar people, who have never actually signed their sovereignty over to anyone. They're one of the few natural peoples on Earth that always fought and won. It's not well known, but there are a few tribes out there who never gave in they're in essence some of the toughest people on the planet. The Spaniards couldn't defeat them, and now they're probably going to have a hard time with these mercenaries. Although I understand that they're very well armed and whatnot, but they're going to give them a run for the money. But to this point in time, last time I spoke with David about 2 weeks ago, he said only 3 of them have been killed. And there's like 6,000 mercenaries ready to pounce.
So only 3 of what? The mercenaries or the Shuar people?
The Shuar people. Yeah, Shuar.
Only 3 of them had been killed.
Yeah.
But understand, in that area is where the oil is. And I think it was Exxon that was in there. Literally Chevron,
I think. Yeah.
Just destroyed the area. They had oil spilling they come out of the pumps and all over. And these people were standing knee deep in oil.
Yeah.
You'd see them a picture of them in their house and standing literally knee deep in oil sludge water. They had no water to drink. They couldn't grow plants. The kids were dying, from pollution. It was horrific. But it's like I say, these are third world countries, and they're under extreme pressures to balance between development and things like an area where the oil is and uranium, and trying to extract that as a natural resource, and then fending off the World Bank.
Does Ecuador have a common border with Bolivia?
No,
eh?
No, there's Brazil to the east, there's Peru to the south, and Colombia to the north. They're like a little triangle. They're boxed in. No, Bolivia is farther south. But Bolivia is on the southern end of Peru.
All right.
So you got to cross Peru before you get to Bolivia.
Okay, because I know that Putin's been talking to them about a nuclear power plant there. So I thought
Brazil, yeah. But
not just Brazil, but in Bolivia.
Bolivia, yes, right.
Yeah.
But the Bolivia is working in Ecuador with the Russians on extracting uranium down in that region. They've been there for many years. In that region where the Shuar people are.
What a mess that makes.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up some good points. What on earth is Bolivia doing trying to set up nuclear power plants?
Yeah. Well, it's I like Putin. To me, he's the only international leader of a powerful country that's doing anything right. But man, his desire to sell nuke power everywhere, especially in the southern hemisphere, is a huge mistake. Because we've got 400 plus reactors in the north, and we still have no idea what to do with the waste and all the leaking.
No, it's
And
a
what are we doing?
disaster.
I thought James, they actually had there was some common sense on this planet left, and they said, okay, well, if we mess up the northern hemisphere, most of us can move to the south. But it
But that's
seems they
really
want to
not true.
destroy the whole planet.
Yeah, no, it gets to the southern hemisphere too. You know, uh,
Well,
but
yeah, the radiation.
and there's not, believe me, there's you couldn't take the population of the world from the northern hemisphere, of which is about 90% of the world population lives in the northern hemisphere. I don't know if you know that.
No, I believe you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and 90% of the land is in the northern hemisphere. Once you get down to the equator, which runs through Ecuador, south, there's not much usable land. It's very dry. It's very mountainous. It's you got the Amazon jungle. uh, I mean, there's some pretty inhospitable regions. Uh, I'm currently talking with some people down in one of those countries to try and set up some agricultural, but it's in the driest place in the world. Uh, it's really incredible. I mean, there's literally no water. They have to bring in water from 1,000 miles away just to have water. But it's very inhospitable. Yeah, there's and hey, there's very little bit of Africa in the southern hemisphere. You have Australia, but there again, most of it is inhospitable. New Zealand, it's a pretty rugged place to live, and literally the southern hemisphere. There's no way you could move the world population there at
Mm.
all.
Well, no, I don't think the plan. It's more like the idea of that plate
That right, you would destroy one hemisphere, but the other one would survive.
that sign. God, what's the name of it in southern U.S. Georgia? I think where the Georgia Guidestones, where they talk about decreasing population to 500,000,000. I think you could put 500,000,000 people in the southern hemisphere quite easily.
Well, there probably
But
already is.
yeah, so
There's yeah, that's only 500 million people,
yeah,
and you already, but between Brazil and add up all the countries there, you might get up to half a billion.
hmm oh yeah,
Um,
I'm sure there's almost that many in Africa, south of the equator. No.
right, and yeah, so
Africa is actually a huge country. We don't realize how big it is. It evidently they say that what it shows on a map is not indicative of the size of it. It's not really that accurate.
right, but if you look at the equator, you
Or
take a globe or a map and look at the equator, there's not much of Africa south of the equator.
hmm,
Most of Africa is in the northern hemisphere. And same with South America, cut through Ecuador, then go east across the Amazon through Brazil, and then go south. There ain't much there.
yeah.
Not a lot there. And the same with Africa, and the only other major thing in the southern hemisphere is Australia, and you might get a few people in the outback, but that's about it.
Okay, let's get back to the issue of these rods of God because I know that they've created controversy in certain circles of friends of mine and whatnot.
Yeah.
Can you give us a historical sort of understanding of where this program came from, how it started, whatnot?
Yeah, the rods from God. I mean, I have some pictures on my webpage of the actual satellites, but it looks like a Gatling gun. And the tubes, a Gatling gun is like a Civil War device. It's like a tube with barrels, many barrels,
Yeah.
each barrel having its own shell. And the idea is that you could rotate this thing and boom, boom, it'd be like a first version of a machine gun. So anyway, that's what this looks like. So each tube in the Rod from God satellite has a rod from God, and it looks like an arrow. And all they do is push the thing out. It really is like an arrow, and it comes down into the atmosphere. And the people have this misconception that a rod from God comes down from a satellite and comes down and hits Earth. But the celestial mechanics part of this is once it starts coming out of orbit and down towards the Earth, it speeds up. And so they come in nearly horizontal. That's one of their characteristics. They don't come down. They come horizontally through the atmosphere, and then they slow down, and they can target these things. They initially were in the late 1990s, were the first versions of these, and they were at that point kinetic energy weapons, where they could target these fairly accurately to hit something. And the tremendous speed that these came in at gave it a big punch. And basically, it was just a titanium rod with a fin on it to make it go straight, like an arrow. Well, it didn't take them long to figure out that you could put a charge in these things. And around the early 2000s, during the Saddam Hussein days, I don't know if you remember, but the Germans had built these bunkers where Saddam had his office basically down many, many, many layers of reinforced concrete that went way down into the ground.
Right.
And the United States didn't have anything that could penetrate that. So they had what they called bunker buster bombs. And these bombs were developed, and what they did is that when the first charge went off, okay, the bomb came down, it was more like a rocket. First one came down, it had a casing inside another shell that would explode through. So the purpose of the first layer was to break through the first layer. Then something came out of that one, like another shell, and blasted down into the next layer. Then another one came out and blasted into the next layer. And these were called bunker busters, where they put that same technology in the rod from God. And the idea was that they could take one of these nuclear devices, either conventional or nuclear. They could blow something up at the surface of the earth, or they could send a charge down deep into the earth and then explode it from there. And that's what they were using in Ecuador. Now, if you go on the internet and look up rods, a lot of times they call them rods of God, using of instead of from. But the correct military term is rods from God, and what a distorted name that is. But anyway, you'll see pictures and you'll see people talking about these as if they were kinetic energy weapons.
It depends what God you worship, James. It's their God.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
But they talk about them as kinetic energy weapons, and that was the original, 15 years ago or more models were kinetic energy weapons, but it didn't take them long to figure out how to put these charges. It's the same technique they use like in anti-tank weapons. You have a shell with a hardened uranium, depleted uranium casing that blasts through the first layer of steel, and then another one blasts through the next one. And then what you do is you literally burn the tank up. You vaporize the tank. But you got to get a shell into the tank inside so that it absorbs all that energy and burns up. So I don't know if you've ever seen a video. It's pretty horrific. A jet comes in, or a hellfire missile from a tank, or from a helicopter or whatever, or a cruise missile, same thing. But they come in and they'll hit a tank. You're talking about 20,000 pounds of steel, and it vaporizes that thing. So that's what they do. It's a penetrating shell, because you got to get the charge inside before you explode it, because if you explode something off the surface, all that energy just blows away. And so it's the same technique. You have to penetrate whatever it is. So that's what the rods from God do, and they can use either conventional or they can use a nuclear load, and then they can send these probably as much as 5 kilometers into the ground before they detonate them.
How do they, James, so they're coming in, they must be pretty hot, eh? If they've just dropped into the atmosphere. That would help, I think, with the penetration. But what are they made of? Are they made of some sort of metal we don't really, that's not commonly known? Or what? How do they not just burn up?
Well, depleted uranium is the hardest typical material that they use. That's very common in military for tips, and that's why people in Iraq can't have babies, because they were blowing that depleted uranium all over the place with every tank shell that went off.
So you think that these rods from God are made of depleted uranium?
I would suspect so. That's my guess. I mean, I don't know, but that's my guess. But the charge inside could be a conventional explosion or it could be nuclear. And the nuclear explosions, that's why I did the piece on Ecuador in the first place, back in, I don't know, was it April? When the reports came out that afterwards there was severe radiation poisoning. And when I was there again this time, I reconfirmed my personal observations that I would estimate 100,000 people had severe radiation poisoning after the first rod from God that came in.
Was there any common understanding of this, James, at all even in the alternative media down there?
No, no. What they told the people at the hospitals, because they were just flooded in the hospitals in a certain region, and it was north of where the actual earthquake was. But what they told the people was that this was because of all the dead people. That's what they told these people. And it was in a region where there really weren't a lot of dead people from the earthquake. But that's what they told the people, and the people repeat it. That's what little kids will tell you. It's because of all the dead people. And little kids, women, children, everybody had radiation poisoning. And characteristic radiation poisoning. Skin, when the dust gets on the skin that has the radiation, it starts burning. So you have these burns all over your skin. Some people went in the ocean to try and clean off because there was an earthquake. There was no facilities. So they went to the ocean to try and wash off. And that was worse because the ocean was covered with this radioactive dust. And so they came out and they were just loaded with this radioactive dust. And your body, once the dust goes away, which, eventually washes off, etc., then your body, just heals itself over a matter of, days or a week or something, and it goes away. But the damage is still done. But the classic radiation poisoning symptoms, vomiting, upset stomach, dizziness, the sores all over the skin, like I say, men, women, little kids, everybody in between. And a high percentage of the people in this region had it. And so I met people that didn't have any. But some of those people may have been, when the cloud moved through, some of them may have been indoors or something like that. It's hard to say, but it's a place where literally the windows are open. It's open air living.
Well, because of their lifestyle and the fact that they eat so well, I would think they'd have a low cancer rate there. We'll have to see if those stats change.
It's hard to say. Yeah, it's very difficult to say what the end result will be. But the classic. My degree is in nuclear physics, so I don't know who talks about this. my information on medical issues with nuclear physics, etc., are from the Tulane Medical School. That's where I got my classes with my physics degree dealing with nuclear biology and nuclear medicine. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need people to. When I do research, when I release information, it's because it's something I did. I know what I'm talking about. I don't go into areas where I don't know what I'm talking about. If I don't know, I will admit it or I will qualify it. But this is something I know about.
Right.
And you talk to doctors who are told by somebody in their chain of command that tell this to the people. It's because of the dead people. And it's a ridiculous response because in this region, there were not hardly any dead people. Yet all these people show up with these red sores all over their body. At the same time, nausea, vomiting, all of the classic radiation poisoning symptoms. And caused by dead people. Even if there were dead people, it wouldn't cause that.
I thought it was more related to some sort of dengue fever or the Zika virus or something.
No,
we're going
to those two. Those people live there all the time. Why would an earthquake cause any difference? And those are not symptoms of dengue fever. I've had dengue fever. I know what dengue fever is like, and you don't get sores on your skin, you don't vomit, you don't have nausea, you get dizzy because your whole body has a dull ache in the muscles. Those are symptoms of Zika virus or dengue fever or similar types of viruses.
Do you think
But
that the doctors believe this explanation?
what explanation?
The explanation about it's somehow related to the fact that a lot of people died, that all these symptoms developed.
No, that's what
It
they were
doesn't
telling the
have a lot
people.
of medical teleology to it. You would think the doctors would question that kind of explanation.
Yeah, but there again, the doctors don't have any reason to believe there was nuclear issues there, and I guarantee you that probably not a single one has any training in nuclear radiation.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something you commonly study, and there's no reason for them to believe it.
They've never had a nuke plant there. They've been on hydroelectrics,
Yeah, they have
renewables.
they have no experience. I've seen cases like that over and over again in my experience living in say third world countries. People, this has happened many times. People from the United States or something go down to a third world country. The kid gets sick. They go, well, we want to take him to the best doctors available. So they go back to the United States and they take him to the medical clinics and they don't know what's wrong with them. And if they're smart enough to go back to the country, 9 times out of 10, the local doctors will say, yeah, that's this, here's the treatment. Or you can go into a pharmacy and get that. But in the case of nuclear radiation poisoning, those doctors don't have any experience at all. By our standards, they're fairly poorly trained. And they're trained in basic things that they would encounter in those countries. So, you can understand that there's not a reason for the medical doctors to recognize what they're dealing with. And it lasted for about a week and then it went away.
Yeah, sounds like almost like a neutron bomb kind of
Well,
concept,
no,
right?
a neutron bomb is the radiation from a neutron bomb is X-rays, and it's very different. This was the type of radiation that is airborne, attaches to dust particles, which is a typical standard plutonium type of excuse me, a bomb or warhead.
Or DU, right?
Yeah.
DU is very nasty stuff, and the problem with DU is it never goes away. I mean,
Well, depleted uranium though is after the fact. No depleted uranium is not going to cause an explosion like this. So this is live stuff. This is like plutonium. This is a warhead. It's a standard nuclear charge, small. And remember that you're not creating an earthquake, you're triggering an earthquake. You're triggering energy systems that are already sitting there built up. 60 years earlier, Ecuador had a major earthquake. And so it's not out of line. It's just that this one happened to be triggered by a man-made device. I have pictures now from that I've got there. I knew they were there. I knew where to go get them from people who had taken pictures of the April rods from God that came in. There were 3 of them. And now I now have pictures of them. I may publish them, I may not. I don't like publishing pictures because, I don't like it as evidence. Pictures now are not usable in a court of law anymore. So anyway, I have these from my own records, my own information of where they were taken, so I can tell where the rods from God came in from. And they came from the Northeast, so I even know where they came from. So you could actually track the satellite that they came from. But I don't think I'm going to publish those pictures. There's basically the moon with 3 rays coming across the moon in the sky, taken with a telephone camera. And so, but that's when I announce something, it's because people believe me because I'm credible, because they believe what I say. Let me say this too. I don't have to make stuff up to get attention. I'm on international radio shows. I have 50 different topics I can talk about. I don't have to make something up to get attention. I don't have to create stories out of thin air to get attention. I have lots of things I can talk about. In fact, I was studying something completely different when the earthquakes hit. I was about 200 miles from the earthquake when it hit in April. And so, but I don't have to make stuff up to get attention. I'm not like some people that have to make stuff up. I don't make things up. I do analysis. It's based on facts, and people that understand the facts can understand these people are not sick due to a bunch of dead people. It had nothing to do with dengue fever or Zika virus. Why would all of a sudden you have an outbreak after an earthquake? That's ridiculous. These people live outside all the time. And these are in regions where they typically spray for Zika virus and mosquitoes continually. They come through these areas and spray weekly. So they didn't have outbreaks. There was no reason to have outbreaks after an earthquake.
Right.
And only for that week, and then it went away and it never came back.
Okay, James, just I want you to get your credits in for your website and whatnot. So let's just ask one. I'm going to ask one more question, and just don't talk too long on this one. But what do you attribute the interesting light show that was going on during the earthquake? What sort of forces?
These during an earthquake, after an earthquake, in fact, it's a topic I pioneered that's called earthquake luminosity. And it happens during or after an earthquake, and it's low-level light that you see in the atmosphere. It's something the Russian scientists were interested back in the 90s when I worked with them. It's something that Western science has just only recently discovered. But when you see a light come flashing across the sky horizontally, and it looks like a meteorite coming in, the rods from God have a very characteristic look to them. They look like a meteorite, but they have a long, thin tail that comes out the back end of them. That stays there for a long period of time. It's very characteristic. And so you can tell the rod from God from a meteorite, and the pictures and the videos that came out of Ecuador from the earthquake were rods from God. I mean, you can identify them. And so at any rate, but the atmospheric conditions afterwards were like lightning, flashes in the sky. And this is just the electrical conditions in the atmosphere neutralizing after basically what amounts to an electrical event besides an explosion. Anytime you have matter under high pressure, it's called a piezoelectric effect, and it creates charge, and there can be discharges related to that. So that's what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. And how long would it usually last?
Minutes, usually within minutes after the earthquake, and then it stops, it goes away, and that's it.
Okay.
And that I observed myself. But with the rods from God, this is like a meteorite coming across the sky and leaving a trail. It's not atmospheric lightning. And Duke University, it really made me angry. Duke University came out after the April earthquake and after the May earthquake in Ecuador and said, oh, that's just atmospheric lightning. And these are videos of meteorite type of objects coming in from above, coming across horizontally, which is characteristic of the rods from God, with the characteristic little thin trail, just like the one they did in Turkey, just like they did in China, just like they did in Russia about a year ago, the same exact characteristic trail. You can tell them if you know what to look for. And so they were rods from God. There's no question that that's what happened. But the atmospheric lightning that's a somewhat of a different question.
Yeah. This type of weapon system would be extremely hard to defend yourself against, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. They're coming in fast. You could potentially have a system. The hardest time to deal with an object is when it's coming in. Anybody that knows about anti-ballistic missile systems knows that the time you want to get a rocket that's going off is when it's first taking off. It has a big heat signature. It's easy to get up behind it and come into that heat signature and blow up the engine, and that's what you do. Everybody in that industry knows, military industry knows that that's what to do. But the anti-ballistic missile systems like NATO is putting in Europe are for things that are coming across the sky and coming in. Extremely hard to hit things when you're doing that. It's like a bullet hitting a bullet. It's in their failure. Every system they've developed is a complete failure. And Putin knows that, but he doesn't want to get in a shooting war with NATO. And Obama is pushing this NATO deal, trying to force Putin into a war. That's a big mess. That's a whole mess in itself.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about that situation, but we're kind of running out of time. I want to get your, I want to give you a chance here to get out some, some of the promotion for what you're up to, your website and all that kind of stuff. So jmccsci.com.
You got it. 7 letters. JMCC, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie, I as in Indigo. Short for jmccanneyscience.com. But yeah, the 7 letters will get you there. jmccsci.com.
And you've got water filters. You've got quite a wide range of books. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, the water filters, my own name branded system of water filters, and manufactured in our own factory right in the United States, the highest quality water filters in the world. They're the filter elements, which are the heart of the systems, are an all-in-one inclusive filter element. So it takes out fluoride and arsenic and glyphosates and chloramines and a very, very long list of volatile chemicals, the lead, heavy metals. Basically, we went through all the toxins that are out there, and these filters target those. They allow the essential minerals to pass through because it's targeted filtering, and they're the best filters in the world. They're relatively inexpensive and available on the webpage. So that's there. My books, my library of books, which I've written, there's about 11 books there. There's DVDs, videos, my sun calendar clock that is there. It's a wonderful invention that only I have. And then posters. So all my book library, CDs, DVDs, lecture series, etc., are all on that webpage, on the sales page. Plus, I promote other products. Via Viente was a product developed in Ecuador, super healthy. Carrot bars, I'm a representative for Carrot Bars Gold, so I'm a gold retailer. And then a new product that is called Permacube. I'm a vendor for them. I'm a certified affiliate to sell those, and that's an amazing technology. Jim, Gale, and the crew there selling it. You can put this in your backyard, produce all of your food, protein, fish, chicken, and so anyway, that's available on my webpage also. By the way, you can change your 401k retirement plan in the United States into a Permacube, which people are doing. People are talking about that. It's a very good way to take a worthless investment, a 401k, and turn it into